let's get into floral design. I will share with you that one of my favorite ways to design a floral arrangement, I think, is almost one of the simplest ways, other than cutting some flowers and putting them in a vase. My absolute favorite way to style flowers is with flower frogs, and if you're not familiar with what that is, there are a couple different types of flower frogs, but my favorite type of flower frog to work with is a pin frog, and I have an example of a small one right here. It's about 1 inch squared, and it has very heavy and has these sharp little spikes that you're working with. You will find that these come in larger sizes, smaller sizes. They run the gamut, but the key is to find some that have sort of a nice heft to them. And I will link below in my show notes some different options for you in case you're really interested in trying it out. Another type of flower frog you might find is if you're into thrifting or antiquing, you might come across glass flower frogs that are similar to this style here, but it would be just sort of this glass version with little holes that are typically about the same size, and those are used for a similar type of flower arranging. This is one of my favorite bowls or vessels to use because it looks like a bowl but has these beautiful variegated or various size holes to it. So when you're using it, you just essentially put your stems into those holes, and it gives a very sort of organic feel to the arrangement. So this is definitely one of my favorites, and I will link that as well. I believe it's called from the Floral Society, which has beautiful, beautiful candles and vases and various floral supplies. So I highly recommend checking them out. But I also like sort of thinking outside the box in terms of how to work with these flower frogs. And so some of the things I like to do are using just sort of everyday household items. This is actually one of my favorite vintage teacup and saucers. And I would essentially put the flower frog in here and do the arrangement from there. So that's one thing to consider. I like using compote bowls too. I love things with stands. I love getting some height to things, and just really using different types of household vases or platters or bowls to do sort of a very free form arrangements. One of my absolute favorite pieces to work with though is this cake stand that I actually purchased at Anthropologie a couple of years ago, and just absolutely loved that it had a deep enough plate, if you will, that I could have water in it and also use it as a floral vessel. So this is one of my favorite pieces to work with. I actually have the flower frog already attached, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. So this is the vessel I'm going to be working with for this demonstration. But one of the things to think about if you end up using these flower frogs is that you could essentially, if you were doing a flower arrangement just for your dinner table and you wanted just something super simple, you could purchase, 3 or 4 of these, put them down in the center of the table and just put a stem in it, and then don't even worry about having water for it. If it's something that it's only going to be for one dinner event or luncheon event or whatever, you really probably could get away with some flowers being out of water for just a couple hours. So it's something I would recommend just putting down on the table right before everybody is seated or everybody arrives. But really, I encourage you to sort of think outside the box of how you can incorporate these flower frogs into your arrangements. But so sometimes you can just use it as is in the bowl or the platter or whatever you're going to, the vase you're going to use it in, and the weight of it in and of itself is fine, but sometimes you want to add a little extra structure or security to the frog so that once you get all of your stems in there, the weight of the stems or the head of the flowers doesn't pull the arrangement. So I use Floral Putty, and this is something you can kind of use again and again and again. I actually had to scrape it off one of my other bowls to be able to show you this, but again, I'll link this below, but it comes in sort of a long roll, and I just sort of peel off a piece of it. It's very pliable, and I just put a lot of it on there. Really what you want to do is sort of cover the entire bottom surface of the frog. And what you're essentially going to be doing is trying to create a very strong seal to whatever you're putting it on. So if, let's say I was using it on this little saucer, be very careful with it, obviously, if you're using something vintage, but you just put some pressure on it, and then I usually just twist it a little bit just to get a little bit more secure. And you want to make sure that has an opportunity to really adhere before you add water to it, because if it's not airtight, the water can get underneath it and then it could be tippy. So just really use a little bit more putty than you think, and then just wiggle it down till it's secure. Most of the time it's not going to be too much of a concern because you're not using heavy branches and things like that, but just want you to have an idea of how to secure that. So I've already secured this in here. I've actually used it several times. So sometimes you don't even need to remove it. If it's something you know you're going to use this vessel more than once, then I would just leave it. Just make sure it's secure. I would generally fill this up with water so that it comes to the top of the spikes, and I would make sure that you keep the arrangement hydrated that way. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm not putting any water because I just worry that it's just going to spill. So just know that I would normally add water to the vase arrangement prior to working with it, because you want your flowers to stay as hydrated as possible. I am lucky enough to live in the South, and so it's early March and things are already blooming. So I've already gone out into the garden to pick some things that have just recently come up, and I just wanted to share with you that this arrangement is really sort of, I don't have any preconceived idea of what it's going to look like. I really just like looking at what's available to me and then just sort of work from there. So I do have daffodils. I have a number of different daffodils that I'll be working with that I'll show you. I have one of my absolute all-time favorite flowers to work with are hellebores or Lenten roses. And if you haven't seen these before, they're simply magical, I think, with all those little freckles and the little stamens. I love the droopy heads to the buds. There's lots of great foliage on them. This is another variety here. So I have about 4 or 5 different varieties in my garden. I will talk briefly about hellebores in terms of using them in a vase. Sometimes they can get a little bit droopy once you've cut them and then put them in a vase. So one of the things you can do in terms of making the stems as hardy as possible is to bring them inside, and then I just take a paring knife and I just make a slit into the stem lengthwise. I don't go all the way through the stem, just enough to break through that edge, and I do it sort of on 2 sides. And I typically stop before the bottom of the stem, mostly for me because I'm using it in a pin frog. So if I split this stem, I have less stability at the bottom to work with. But if you were just going to put it in a vase with water, you shouldn't have to worry too much about that. The other thing to think about in terms of its sturdiness is if you wait till it goes essentially to seed, you can see that it really doesn't have like the little stamens like this one does. Then typically the stem is going to be a little bit harder, and that's going to be have more longevity to it. The other thing you can do is once you've sort of cut or scored the stem is to put the stems in hot water briefly. That will help the water go all the way through the stem to the top, and that keeps it hydrated, and it really just helps the flower be a little bit more stable in the arrangement. One of the things I'm not sure everybody is aware of, but if you are lucky enough to come across daffodils, or Trader Joe's usually has them bundled, and they're very inexpensive. They're a very accessible flower in the spring. But when you bring them home, and if you're adding them to other flowers in arrangement, and they're not already prearranged or bundled, I would say separate them out and then give them a fresh cut and then put them in water for a few hours, because they do secrete a sap that can kill other flowers in a vase arrangement. So if you have the ability to cut them, set them aside for a couple hours in their own vessel of water, and then work on the arrangement, the longevity of your other flowers will be so much better. So that's sort of one little tip. And then one of the other things we're working with, which is absolutely adorable and also a favorite in my garden, is spirea. This is the branches are super thin and super long, and they have a wonderful curve to them. And this particular variety, of course, which I don't know off the top of my head, has 4-season interest, really. It has these beautiful buds that come out in the spring, and then very chartreuse green leaves that are sort of feathery, and they turn beautiful color in the fall. And I also love using them even when they're dried. Like last week I had some in a vase arrangement, and the flowers dried off, but you can see that the just the buds that are left over are just really fun. So one of the things I think about in terms of flower arrangements and the flowers I choose, or the things that I choose for my arrangements, is I love things with movement. So this for me just that has the swoopy quality to it. A flower like this that has buds that are sort of drooping, and I like to look at sort of the shape of the flowers and then just consider how I want to incorporate that into my design. So that's like a lot of things I think about in terms of when I'm arranging things, is how will they look, how will they interact with something else. I typically wouldn't just cut everything the same height. I like to have things at various heights. And one of the things I love about flowers is just the idea that you have to come closer to appreciate them. And that's one of the things that I probably think about a lot in terms of my designs. I love using really tiny flowers. I love things that have texture and various colors to them. And I like thinking about different ways to work on something that's sort of, you think daffodil, what could I do to make it a little bit more interesting? And I found we just had a rainstorm last night, and I found some petals that were already very wet and droopy and sticky. And so I just pulled off the outer layers of the daffodil, and now I'm just using the head of the daffodil or the center of it, and it totally changes the look of the flower. At some point I'll talk about other flowers that you can buy and ways you can manipulate them to have it look like a completely different flower. Tulips would be next. So anyway, I just encourage you to sort of think outside of the norm of, just picking a flower and cutting it and sticking it in a vase. Just what other ways can you express the beauty of the flower, and have people or you look at it differently. So anyway, the last thing I have to add to this arrangement would be cherry blossoms. So I'm fortunate enough to have cherry blossom or a cherry tree in my front yard, and I was going out yesterday to bring some in to force, and I got a little overzealous, and as I was reaching for one of the tiny little branches, I actually broke off an entire branch. So I'm going to use this as much as possible, but I just brought them inside. I put them, the larger branch, into a big vase with water, and I manipulated the bottom of the stem by just breaking it up a little bit so it draws water up. A lot of times when you bring branches inside, like forsythia or other cherry blossoms or lilacs to force, sometimes it's best to try to remove a little bit of the bark at the bottom and crush it a little bit, so that just helps the water go all the way to the top of the stem and keep the flowers hydrated. So anyway, let's get started. One of the other tools of the trade you want to consider is having a really good pair of shears. These are really comfortable in the hand. I love how wide they are. They come in a rainbow of colors, so of course it's sort of fun to have colorful things to work with. So I've got the stems, and I think what I'll do is I'll start with the hellebore. And another thing to consider is editing your stems. So that's something that floral designers think a lot about. They sometimes, a flower will have a lot of extra foliage that maybe just distracts from your design. So I just think about that too. And when I'm doing like a really simple floral design with a frog, like you literally could put 2 or 3 stems into this design and be done. So think about sort of the negative space or how crowded something looks when you have a lot of foliage with it. For right now, I like the way this is shaped. I like that it's coming at 2 different directions. One of the things I love about flower frogs is to come at the pins at a different angle. So I don't always just come straight up and down with my stems. I love that I can sort of get in and kind of come at a different angle. So you're essentially, you know, want to make sure you support the stem as you're pushing in, because sometimes it's a little tricky to get it in there. And sometimes it's a matter of like you get it in there and you add some other things and then it comes out. So just be flexible with what you're doing with it. Just know I could, you know, I could have done this 100 times and it still could not work quite the way I want it. But I like the sort of curvature of that right there. And I like to think of things that will also cover the pin frog. So I might add something down below. In fact, I'll do that right now. So I'm just gonna cut the stem. I did cut at an angle, but actually for this type of design with a pin frog, it's probably best to cut it straight. So your surface area as you put it into the pin is a little bit more straight on. So if I just angle it that way, maybe come from the back a little bit, you can see that it totally blocks your ability to see the mechanics or the pin frog itself. And we're like straight on with that flower. But I love sort of using various heights of things. You'll see that I'm doing this a little bit differently because I'm doing this for your viewing or your view of this, but I typically will pull the stem sort of to the back of my work and look at the height of the vase and look at the height of the table, and then it can help me decide where to cut. So if it's a great trick if you're working at your kitchen counter to bring the vase to the front of your counter, and then if this is my counter here and that's about how high I want it out of the vase, I would just cut it there. So that's a really good visual. I think I actually want that a little bit shorter. So the one thing about daffodils is they're a very hollow stem. And so sometimes these pin frogs, the spikes can go straight into the stem and it's hard to work with. So sometimes you have to wait till you get a little bit more stems in there that'll help it grab a hold and stay sort of where you want. This is a really pretty frilly daffodil, so that's kind of fun. And I like that they're sort of in the same color range, but not quite all the same. I like arrangements that if I really wanted to, I could have had this all be very monochromatic, have all the white daffodils or all the yellow daffodils. But do you see I'm just sort of filling in sort of the negative space there and trying to figure out what plays well together. And you could see I'm struggling a little bit too to get that in there. And I like how these three are playing with each other. So it's nice to sort of saturate a design with having your eye have, you know, several things. Usually it's in the threes of things to look at. So the color is sort of more, has more impact. But I also want my eye to be drawn to sort of other places in the design. So here's an idea or a little bit more information about editing. So look at how fantastically beautiful that is. But I don't necessarily need to use the entire stem. I might want to break this apart so that I have two different stems to work with. I love that this has this droopy bell-like quality to it, and so I want to see if I can incorporate that into this design in some ways. And I think I'm going to try to go in front here. So I'm just going to cut it a little bit, and then this leaf to me seems like it's taking away from being able to see the bud itself. So don't be afraid to just pull leaves off and edit it down. In fact, I do that a lot with the hellebores because I feel like I want you to be able to see all the details of the design or of the flower. And sometimes you just can't see it if all of the leaves are in the way. These have a lot of beautiful stems to them or leaves to them, but I really want to be able to see just the flower head. And hopefully when you do your editing, you don't cut the flower, but sometimes that happens. But you can see that you're already able to see much more of the flowers since I'm taking essentially all the leaves off. So really, I just encourage you to play, and there's no real rules to this. I kind of like that this one has a little bit of a stem there. And actually, so I'm thinking that I'm going to pull this one out for now and maybe just put this one in a little bit over the edge. I kind of like having things look a little bit organic, as if they were just growing in my garden that way, and the more natural the better. I'm also thinking that some of this foliage in this one in the back is a little bit too pronounced, so I'm just going to cut that away. And you see how it just automatically allows you to see the flowers. I'm just going to bring it a little bit forward for you too. So there's more space and light coming in around them. And I think I'll go for this spirea. So again, you know, using a pin frog, there's sort of rules that are a little bit different than a vase. You know, and when you're putting flowers in a vase of water, you want to make sure that you remove all the stems or all the foliage, greenery, any extra stems that are below the water line, because they're just going to add bacteria to the water, and it will actually make the flowers die more quickly. So what I'm doing here, and I'm not going to do it over my bed, is I'm going to remove all the flowers from here down, and all I'm going to do is just pinch my fingers around the stem and pull it off. So it's got a really nice clean stem for me, and I just love just the movement of this and how curly it is. So I'm going to try to find a good spot for that, and I think we're going to go here again. This is a little bit awkward for me because I'm designing facing out instead of to me. Sometimes I'll design on a Lazy Susan so that I can twirl it around. Usually when I'm doing a vase arrangement, I will put on a Lazy Susan and twirl it around, because you always want to think about your audience and who's going to see it and where they're going to see the arrangement. Sometimes you're going to put on your kitchen counter and you're going to want it to be seen on all sides, or sometimes it's going to be put on a buffet table and you only need 3 sides to be shown. So that's just something to consider. Oh, and I lost some flowers. So see, it's trial and error. Maybe he just didn't need to be right there. This spirea has very tiny stems, so it's hard to get it in there. But I think you can appreciate sort of the movement there, and maybe, yep, see, things just start moving. And it's just to rework it. Sometimes you have to recut the base of the stem because it's already been pushed into the pin once, and then once things start moving again, you might need to just adjust that. And I think, let's see, maybe we'll just do a little bit of cherry blossom, because who doesn't need a little bit of pink in their design. And this is very woody, so we'll see how this goes in the pin frog, but a lot of times you have to use a little bit more force with a woody stem. So I'm really holding the vase itself and pushing down really firmly, so just don't be afraid to add a little bit of force. And then sometimes I like to just add something that'll just float in the design too. This is beautiful, beautiful, ruffly. Maybe I don't. Maybe I just need you to be exactly how you are. And maybe I'll just put you right here. And you see how that just filled in? This takes your eye down to this very prominent forward-facing flower. And I think I might just want a little bit of saturation over here for a little bit of the yellow peeking onto the other side. So I'll come at it maybe here. And oops, see, now the stem just sort of broke a little bit, or it split. So sometimes, you know, this can be a little bit tricky to use. You just have to sort of sometimes be gentle and sometimes be a little more forceful. But I'm liking how that looks. I'm wondering if maybe, sometimes I like adding dried materials too, like this for me. So this screams spring. It's obviously everything that's blooming all at once right now in my garden. And one of the other things we're waiting on are the dogwoods to bloom. And I love to forage for branches, and my neighborhood is considered an arboretum. And so there are flowering trees all along our boulevards. And when there are storms, everybody piles up all of their branches and I forage for them. So one winter or late spring, before the dogwoods bloomed, there was entire branches of dogwoods, and these are pink. And I've had these in a vase for 4 years now, and they give me so much pleasure. And I thought I would try to incorporate this into the design and maybe just make it a little bit more wild. So I'm just gonna put it right at the back of this. And again, it's woody, so it may not, I kind of wanted to tuck it around some of the other stems. Let's see if I can get it. Oh, you heard that one. But yeah, so I kind of like that you can, that has all of this space around it so you can see the buds. They're just sort of standing out there. And maybe just add a little bit of the greenery coming off the edge there. So I don't know. I think it looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. And what I probably will do is once I add water to this, I'm going to have this little hellebore float in there. And what I'm going to do is try to open it up by, I'm just going to take my fingers and flex the petals back a little bit. You can kind of feel them go. And then it exposes the flower so you can appreciate the absolute beauty and artistry of that. I mean, look at that. So I am going to add water to my design. And some of the spirea flowers are also floating in the water. And so I like to just give a little extra movement to it by floating the hellebore in there. And if I can gently bring this towards you so you can see it a little more closely, there's all the pretty movements. I love the bell quality of that hanging down. I love this cascading off the edge. And I'm not going to tip it too much, but you can see I just have that floating in the design. So there you go. We did it. See how simple that was? I think for me, this is the type of arrangement I just am so drawn to making. And honestly, you could have just done 3 stems or 4 stems or just the daffodils or just the hellebores or just foliage, and you're done. And it's beautiful. So I hope you enjoyed this demonstration. Again, I have show notes. I'm peeking up behind the flowers. I have show notes. There's a little down arrow below that, below the description of the title of this video. And I will list all my links to places you can get floral supplies, and any of the other things that I mentioned in terms of my sweater or the patterns and things like that. And I would absolutely love if you would comment below and just tell me what you enjoyed about this, or share anything, because I love your comments. It's certainly a way for me to feel some level of interaction with you. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to sharing the next thing in this little life. Thanks.